Okay, Tigers, here we go. 4-2, Thursday. Talking about Reagan and his domestic policy covering his first term. The focus here, I'm going to show this, maybe a minute from his inaugural address on 81. But this is where you see the belief of Reagan sort of come forward here. So I'm going to play this, everybody watch.
The economic ills we suffer have come upon us over several decades. They will not go away in days, weeks, or months, but they will go away. They will go away because we, as Americans, have the capacity now, as we've had in the past, to do whatever needs to be done to preserve this last and greatest bastion of freedom. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
And what you see is that's that theme of getting government out of the way happens to go through. Remember, we talked about over the past couple of days, what are Reagan's goals to be the ultimate Republican, right? So, guys, Reagan believed the national government had become too large. Through Johnson and Nixon especially, there was just bloat in the bureaucracy realm. So some of the things that he wanted to do, guys, was to reduce Medicaid, that's free and health care for the needy and the infirmed, right? As well as welfare and job training programs, especially a good one called CETA, C-E-T-A, Competitive Employees Training Act. He wanted to get rid of those things because he just thought the market should be able to handle these issues themselves. He believed in this idea of deregulation and help stimulate businesses by reducing the power of government agencies. And especially one of the areas that he's going to get into are the banks, and we'll get into that later. And then he's going to appoint 4 conservatives in the court, and those conservatives are going to agree with him, for the most part, in terms of a lack of regulation, smaller government, more conservative viewpoints, including Sandra Day, who's the first female Supreme Court justice ever appointed to the bench. Okay? So areas that you see deregulation, industries and environmental protection cause increased competition, lower prices, access to timber and oil resources, as well as other environmental issues that came up. Okay, so you see Sandra Day right there. It's a typo down there, right? It should be O-R, not E-R, throughout. So one of the issues that we were dealing with, guys, was this issue of stagflation. You can see orange is inflation, purple is unemployment, okay? Inflation starting to skyrocket going into the Reagan administration. Okay, so in 1980, interest rates, guys, were at 20%. That's one of the things if you could talk to your parents about. I know I talked to my parents about when they bought a home back at the time, and interest rates were sky high. Interest rates today are less than 3, so crazy. And the value of the dollar was only 36 cents compared to what it should be today. So what you got in term of this idea, and those of you that are in EP Econ, you may have seen this before. An economist by the name of Arthur Laffer came up with this idea of this Laffer curve. And there were 3 points on the curve. He believed that society needs to be, tax revenue and the tax rate needs to be on this left-hand side, this A side here, which the value of government services equals revenue and growth costs imposed on society. Meaning taxes need to be lower, a much lower tax rate than we had before, because growth and economic revenue were being hurt. That's an idea of supply-side economics that we talked about yesterday. Taxes were too high. People didn't have enough money to spend. So there's Reagan's tax cut to stimulate spending. And what you see is, guys, it did work. So look, here's the inflation, and there it starts to go down to about 2%, which is awesome, where we want it to be. The economy started to boom by 1983. Okay, we talked about the jobs, unemployment below 6, inflation fell below 4, all the things that went with that. But to come along with this and to help at that time, okay, Reagan wanted to make sure that we were strong in the world. We had a couple issues throughout in foreign policy in the late 60s and 70s, especially with regard to Vietnam and other places of the world. Oh, excuse me. Okay, so what do we see being built? There's our B-1 bomber, a supersonic bomber that could easily fly in and attack places throughout. Okay, there is our new missile system, the MX missile system. We can see with all the warheads inside carried throughout. But the biggest and the coolest, okay, of the new weaponry being built at the time was SDI, the Strategic Defense Initiative, also known as Star Wars, right? Because it was an anti-ballistic missile system using satellites to shoot down lasers. So this satellite sees something coming and it goes, pew! Except it doesn't make that noise in space because I don't think you can hear sound in space, but whatever, right? Pew! Right? So scientists, guys, here at home, started faking tests and procedures because they knew the Russians were going to follow in line with whatever we were doing. So it's like if you have a younger sibling. Sometimes they look up to you, they want to do what you want to do. Okay? So you know that they're going to follow along in everything you do. So if we build a satellite, the Soviets build a satellite. If we build a missile, the Soviets build a missile, guys. So Reagan finally figures out one way to fight the Russians. And there's nothing more American than this. We're going to outspend the Russians. Guys, these tests, this project, this laser missile system, cost between $40 and $50 billion. And it didn't work. But did the Russians try and build the same thing? Absolutely. And it's going to really bankrupt them and hurt them down the line. So, military spending increases, tax revenue decreases. Uh-oh. We've got deficits. Remember, a deficit is when you bring in less than you spend in a current year. Deficit is 1 year. Debt is overall consolidated throughout. So you can see all the things that are going on at this point. One of the other issues that starts to pop up, guys, and we talked about this as Reagan as the ultimate Republican, right? Remember, you have to find those examples of what does Reagan do to promote this goal of the ultimate Republican, right? Is cutting of social programs and a push back to conservative values. But some of this caused some issues in the 1980s, okay? You saw a change in social programs and helping people get to schools. So you saw in the 1980s an increase in school dropouts. Okay, in 1983, a book written at that time, A Nation at Risk, showed some of the issues in the American education system. And at the time, we were 23rd in reading and 27th in science and 28th in math. And there's arguments back and forth about that because there are a lot of nations that don't educate everybody like we do. So that's a bit of a change at that point. Okay, what else did we see at this time? We saw increases in homelessness, attacks on affirmative action, which was one of those big pushes in the 1970s that we talked about, and a lot of urban poverty and a lot of minority poverty, and a lot of that went together at that time based on some issues that were going on. One of the other issues that we saw going on, guys, were the first documented cases of AIDS. Okay? Now, the Reagan administration did not move quickly because the first cases of AIDS were found amongst gay men, and a lot of people were referring to AIDS as GRID, as gay-related immunodeficiency disease. And you can see, starting in 81, this spike, and this was a major concern going on throughout a majority of my lifetime of diagnoses from AIDS. And you can see the brown line are the death caused by AIDS. It just caused your body not be able to fight off an infection like the cold or the flu throughout. So kind of a little bit thing. You saw a lot of cases begin in San Francisco, New York in 81. And one of the ways that you saw this emerge was this argument about drug use. And crack cocaine was introduced for the first time in the 1980s. Normal cocaine, of course, is snorted. Crack cocaine is injected a lot of times. or you could smoke it as well. This epidemic, of crack led Reagan, and especially Nancy Reagan, to fight what's known as a war on drugs, and became very famous for this Just Say No campaign, where if someone were to come up to you and offer you drugs, you just say no to that point. Very good advice. Pretty good. Tomorrow, Reagan and the Russians. And then we get to dating advice next week. We get to Reagan's second term when he meets his special love, and we'll get to that later. Have a great night. Go Tigers.